Okay, welcome everybody. Episode 4, our fourth week doing this in a row. That's a month. Hey, that's awesome. Congrats to us and to you for listening. This is great.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to getting.
We got a good streak going, so hopefully our listeners are keeping theirs up as well.
Absolutely. So again, welcome to TrueNAS Tech Talk T3, and we got another hopefully interesting episode today. Some fun stuff to talk about. We'll get into it. First up, we're going to talk today a little bit about community edition and branding and what does this mean? So what's the big news here? Actually, some folks have already noticed on the website, and I think there was some chatter on the forums this recent week. Somebody pointed that out on the forums. They noticed we had some tickets to drop the core and scale monikers from the software.
Yes, and you can see we've done that on the site as well in the download page where it's being referred to now as TrueNAS Community Edition as opposed to TrueNAS Core versus TrueNAS Scale. Don't worry about this with regards to a change to licensing. I mean, Chris, you made this change. You made a change in the past actually to make us even more open than we were before.
I wanted to take a moment and just touch on that. So there, early on with Core and Scale, there was even some confusion. People are like, "Oh, is Scale still open source?" And it's like, yes, the exact same license. It had historically always been under various BSD licenses. Fine. And then about a year ago, I want to say now, maybe a little less, we had made a change to switch the Scale repos and the Core repos over to GPL v3 and LGPL v3 for depending on which repo you're looking at. It's even more open source than it ever was. So that's something I think a lot of people missed, but it's an interesting thing to point out. Yes, it's open source. It stays open source. This is mostly a branding change just to get things kind of back under one brand name. So TrueNAS Community Edition, then we'll refer to it as, 25.10, 2404, Electric Eel, Fangtooth, all these, all the names you're used to hearing. It's just we won't be using the Scale and Core monikers in the product or in the branding anymore. But again, our commitment to open source doesn't change. We love open source. We want all the things to be open source, and we expect that to continue. But we wanted to call this out because I think some of the changes have started landing in the nightly images, which are what eventually is going to become Fangtooth in April. So if you see that, don't be alarmed. You heard it here first. That's what's going on in the background. And it's a good change. It means shorthand, I can just start referring to it as just TrueNAS, and I don't have to differentiate. That's what we wanted to get back to eventually. So TrueNAS Community Edition, or if you're running IX appliances, enterprise appliances, TrueNAS Enterprise. It kind of rolls off the tongue. It's easy to make sense of what you're running.
Exactly. We still expect a lot of members of our community are going to continue to call it Core and Scale for easy differentiation, especially if you're on the forums, if you're on our Discord and you're asking for help. I mean, go ahead and call it Core or Scale. The important part is we need to really know which version you're running so that we can answer your question best. That's the best thing to do. Generally give us more information rather than less, and we'll be able to help you out.
Yeah, that version string tells everybody what they need to know. Exactly. That tells you what it is, what version it is. That's more important than just saying Core or Scale, because even within those branches, a 4-year-old Core system is very different from a recent one, a 4-year-old Scale, actually 3-year-old. I think that's the oldest you can get. Very different from modern. So please give us the version string whenever you send a ticket in or have a request or even a question, because it'll definitely change what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, well, the march of time is relentless here. I mean, it may be a little bit longer than you think. When did Angelfish drop? Was that the 21 something release?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back now. It's been a little under 3 years since some of the first Angelfishes came out, and I think we had done some early alphas and betas as well. So again,
I do remember there was a 20 dot something very early alpha that people were poking with.
There was, but I'm thinking back to release editions. I think that was December, so that'd be 3 years as of this December, if we go back to the actual .0. But still, it's went quick. So, it was a good journey. All right, Chris, so let's talk a little about hardware. One of the other things we wanted to touch on today is new hardware is not always the best hardware. So explain what you mean by that.
It's kind of true in this sense. Like we're all nerds here. We want to get our hands on the latest and coolest things. Everybody's beating down the door saying, oh, hey, the new Intel chip just dropped. The new AMD chip just dropped. Should I use it? And, sometimes the new hardware isn't always the best. The bleeding edge of technology is not where I would generally want to be for something as crucial as my, irreplaceable file storage. I might have tiers of backup, but I still say, I don't want to be the first one to discover the pointy rocks on the way down the ski hill, right? So if maybe there's a microcode bug in a new generation of processor that needs to be patched, maybe there's a, just a compatibility challenge between it and the existing kernel that we're using, because in TrueNAS, we're not using the bleeding edge, the latest kernels. we're not, we're not running Arch Linux here. This is not a rolling release where we're constantly compiling in the latest things. We use an LTS, or a long-term supported kernel system. 24.10, I believe we're on 6.644. So we're trying to be not quite in the sense of, conservative that we're lagging behind, but we're trying to use the stable releases.
Yeah. That's super important for things like ZFS compatibility and stuff as well. It's far more tested and better, easier able to support for us when it's against an LTS kernel. So what does that mean? That means, well, Linux upstream, Linus and the guys, they cut a new kernel once a year approximately, a new LTS kernel. And that's the one we're going to pick and standardize on. So Fangtooth is just around the corner. That one we expect is going to land on 6.12. I think, matter of fact, it's this upcoming Sunday is the expected date when the 6.12 kernel is going to officially be released. Usually they'll announce it as the LTS branch shortly after as well. So that's where we're expecting to come in, and whatever hardware is supported by that kernel, you're probably going to be in good shape for next year. But again, if there's some shiny new piece of gear coming out in February of 25, well, maybe the kernel supports it, maybe it doesn't. So you need to check your notes, check the notes on the kernel side beforehand, because it's like buying a GPU. You've been here, I'm sure, Chris, where you get that new GPU and then a new game comes out and the drivers aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Everyone's complaining, and then 6 months later, it's great.
Well, I mean, even with the Intel Arc GPUs, we had challenges. They came out and there wasn't support for them at TrueNAS when they first showed up. So we had to wait for an LTS kernel, for some driver support to come in. We had that issue with just the 12th gen Alder Lake internal GPUs on the Intel cards. Even back in the core days when, dating myself, when the first Ryzen chips came out, and there were some challenges with their deeper C states where people said, hey, my Ryzen system keeps rebooting itself. And it turned out the fix was when they went to a really deep sleep, they couldn't wake back up again. And
no, it's a really efficient sleep state. That's what that really is. That's a marketing win.
Yeah, it's fantastically efficient. Yeah, the forever sleep state, I don't think has the best ring to it. I don't know if I can spin that.
That's the old FreeBSD joke we used to have about suspend, resume support. It's fantastic for suspending, and then you just stop.
Yeah, fantastic suspend support. Resume, we don't talk about that. So in general, it's not always the best to be right on the bleeding edge of technology, or, we welcome those that do, but we also welcome your bug reports and pull requests and your patience and understanding that we can't necessarily say that something's going to be fully supported the exact day it drops on the shelf. If my pre-order ships for my 9800 X3D and I try to build a NAS off of it, I may encounter some new and exciting undocumented feature that has to do specifically with that platform or the chipset that I'm running it on.
And one thing I'll call out too, because we've had some people, they tend to want to push back. Oh, well, it's simple. Just update your kernel. Just pull in a newer kernel. Do that for me. You guys don't quite realize what that entails, like how much testing we have to do, how much possibility of regression now we have to deal with for people where the system was working great, but because we went and, tried to cherry pick that thing or pull this fix in to fix some esoteric new piece of hardware, that puts a lot of risk to everyone else's NAS, and we're going to be a little bit more conservative than that. Again, we're a storage appliance. We have to be a bit more conservative than your typical just homebrew. I'm installing Linux on a thing and just need a driver because it's my desktop. No, this is people's storage and data at risk. So we got to do it right. So we're going to take our time. We're going to test against the LTS. We're going to make sure it's rock solid. And then we're going to be very resistant to pulling in changes unless we can be sure they're safe and that they are targeted and they will only impact the specific thing that's being pulled back from upstream.
Absolutely. And in the cases where maybe there was something like there's a regression or a problem, then that's a case where it might be investigated further. But like you said, Chris, generally speaking, it's we want to have that nice, solid, well-tested hardware. We're going to run it through our own testing, which lasts for months. We should have somebody from the testing department pop in here and speak to that at some point to say, just what do we go through? How intense is this test? And boy, do we lean on things. We're finding all sorts of crazy edge cases.
We should mention too that, you in the community, you're obviously a big part of that, especially in the beta and release cycles. That's going to be the place to identify these issues early, where there's a better chance for us to go pull a fix in. Because believe me, it's far easier for us internally to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and pull a fix in after the beta before we go to RC, or maybe even before the .0, versus asking after the .1 or .2 has been released. And now someone's like, well, pull my fix in. I'm like, we're already at a very stable place. This is an enterprise, release software now. we got to be very, very conservative about the type of changes we bring in. So all that to say, if you have the ability to test with the beta software or RC software, it's worth getting that testing done early, just so we know if there's an issue, if you had a specific hardware issue that you want to have addressed, that's the time where we're likely to go ahead and take a look at it and see if we can bring it in. But if you're waiting to the .1 or .2, great, that's good. I understand for conservative users, sometimes you want to do that, but it just means you might be waiting till the next release cycle before we can address a specific issue if there is some hardware compatibility.
Yeah, if you've got a system that you're willing to run sort of the early releases and the masters on, I mean, go ahead and upgrade to a Fangtooth nightly on that testing machine, build a separate one, see if the behavior of your hardware changes under that. But hey, speaking of upcoming releases, everybody knows we mentioned Fangtooth a couple times. So obviously, alphabetically, we're proceeding through the alphabet. What do we have for our next releases? We're not going to do something as mundane as Goldfish, are we?
No. We had to do something a little bit of a twist to make it more interesting. So the next release names that are coming up, I'm excited to announce. We have Goldeye, which is going to be the October of 2025 release, so 25.10. And by the way, I should explain that if you haven't figured it out yet, those version numbers are actually the year and then the month, but hopefully everyone's caught on to that now.
I look forward to many, many people calling this GoldenEye and the memes that will result from that.
I actually have a little AI generated art I did that looks kind of GoldenEye reminiscent. But anyway, that's just for fun. I haven't published that anywhere. But then the release after that will be, of course, H. And what we've gone with is Half Moon. And for those who don't know if that's a fish, go Google it. It's actually a really pretty little fish. The joke is, of course, it's a beta fish. This will not be a beta release. So let's just get that out of the way. But, it's a really cool name and it's a really pretty fish. And I'm looking forward to getting some cool artwork for that for the release in 2026.
I assume we will be making a beta of Half Moon, but it won't be a beta when it comes out.
Correct. Yeah. That'll be a much more matured Half Moon.
All right. Well, that'll be entertaining.
So I think now we have a question here. You want to read this one off, Chris, and we'll get into the answer?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead. And it looks like since I was talking about newer hardware earlier, we're now kind of going back to a question about some older hardware. So this is a question from Jason Lingor, who emailed this into us. And he just says, hi, crew, loving the podcast. He has an idea or Q&A. He's an old school fan. He said he first bought his TrueNAS Mini 2 from Amazon back in 2018. We've talked a bit about the broad user base. We've even talked about the enterprise line. So how about some love for the Mini line? He says he'd like it if we could talk to the idea of upgrading to scale on the older machines. Would it be a good or a bad idea? He says, I personally think it's more than capable, and generally speaking, it is. He mainly uses it for NFS and SMB. Most of his VMs on different servers, he's serving them data via NFS. He doesn't do Docker apps or jails. So he is running a TrueNAS Mini. It looks like he's got a 5-bay system here, possibly a 4-bay. It looks like it's 4 disks in a RAID Z2. So he's asking about sort of, can we do this process in line? You upgrade to the latest 13. And then he's got a direct question about how to get 10 gig Ethernet into it. So let's kind of dig into this. Just generally, scale versus core on older hardware. Older hardware is much more tolerant of either one that you want to run. Because we're using the LTS kernel, generally that older hardware is going to be really, really well supported. You don't need to have, as I said, the latest and greatest. These older units run just fine. And I mean, I'm trying to think of the age of one of the units that I'm still running daily. It's probably older than your 2018 hardware there. It's probably 2014.
2014. Got to upgrade
2014.
That,
It's a spare. It's an offsite replication.
Okay.
It's an offsite replication box. I think it's a 4th gen Intel. I'm showing my age here. I think it was 2014. I thought for a while there, they lined up with the year of release and the year of the process or the generation of the processor.
Okay. Yeah. So in the case of your Mini 2.0, I actually recently just did an upgrade for somebody on one of these to scale. Now, what we did do is we yanked the SATA DOM out of there because that had been in there for a long time, and those tend to be the pieces that wear out the quickest. And in this case, I think we slapped a 2.5-inch SSD, a really cheap SSD we had laying around into the chassis there, and there was even a little spot to screw it in on the top. No big deal. Plugged it into the SATA DOM port, installed scale, imported the pool, and away we went. Everything else just kind of worked out of the box. Yeah. But I think on the 10 gig, you wanted to address that, Chris. I wasn't sure if that was possible.
Yeah, I was taking a look at it because he was kind enough to send us some additional information, serial numbers. I'm going to have to reach out to you, Jason, but I think we might not be able to upgrade that one to 10 gig based on the motherboard that's in there. I don't think it has the PCIe slots and bandwidth that's necessary to get you a 10 gig network out of this guy, unfortunately. So I will reach out to you and respond directly in an email once we're done the podcast here.
Does it have a PCIe slot that can do 2.5 gig?
I think in this one, the challenge is that the board itself is actually splitting the PCIe lanes between the slot and the additional storage controller on board.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
I will have to take a look at that one in more detail. If he has a 4-bay unit, this may in fact be possible. If he has a 5-bay or a larger bay unit, it may not. So we'll have to dig into it a little bit. Just an example of the fun tests that we have to do to validate certain, configurations.
Absolutely. So good luck. Hopefully that's something you can upgrade. But either way, you should be able to get scale loaded on it, even if it's with the built-in 1 gig networking. And good luck on that journey. Post back on the forums. Let us know how it goes when you get that done, Jason. That sounds like fun.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the question, Jason. I don't think we had any other ones we wanted to address for this week. But as usual, we enjoy having you guys with us every week. Some weeks will be shorter, some longer, and there's always good stuff to talk about. But keep the questions coming in if you have topics, something you want to see us address on the development side, on storage side, or even something tangentially related to TrueNAS. We're happy to talk about that as well. And we will see you again next week.